In the previous lecture, we looked at the structure of sentences, and we talked about them in terms of the X-bar schema. The idea of the X-bar schema is that phrases projected by different types of heads nevertheless have structure in common. They have the same kind of structure. What we're going to look at in this lecture is the structure of some phrases that are headed by non-verbal heads. So the structure of phrases headed by prepositions, by adjectives, but above all by nouns. There are some clear similarities between sentences and noun phrases. So if you take a sentence like the company distributed the record, and you also have a noun phrase, the company's distribution of the record. So in both cases, you have what looks like two arguments. So in the case of the company distributed the record, you have the agent argument, the company, and you have the theme argument, the record. And the agent is expressed as the subject of the sentence. It occurs to the left of the verb, and the theme is the record, and that appears to the right of the verb. And it looks as though we're seeing the same thing in the nominal. So the noun phrase, which is headed by the nominalization distribution, we see again that we have a noun phrase that seems to correspond to the agent of distributing. So we have the company's distribution. And then we have another argument that corresponds to the thing that gets distributed, the record. Although in this case, it's enclosed in a PP, so we get the company's distribution of the record. Given this parallel, it looks as though we could make the attractive assumption that the structure of the noun phrase and the structure of the verb phrase are very similar. In both cases, we have a position to the left, the specifier position, we've argued, for the verb phrase, and a position to the right of the head, the complement position. And it looks as though we could say the same thing for the nominal, and that in both cases the agent is getting expressed in the specifier position and the theme is getting expressed in the complement position. So given this, we have a structure for the NP where we have a complement, which is a PP, and a specifier, which is another NP, which expresses the agent, whereas the complement expresses the theme. So that looks very parallel to the kind of structure that we proposed for VPs. So this parallel between the structure of sentences and the structure of nominals can be taken a step further. In an active sentence, it's typical that the agent is expressed as the subject. It appears in the specifier position of the VP and then of the IP, while the theme is expressed as the complement of the verb. So we have the active sentence, the company distributed the record. But there are processes which can alter that alignment of thematic roles and grammatical positions, and a very prominent one is passivization. So alongside that active sentence, you can also find the passive sentence, where we get the record was distributed by the company. And the same way, in the nominalization, we have the company's distribution of the record, and we also find what looks like a passive version, even though there's no morphology in this case on the noun. So we get the record's distribution by the company. So there again, we see something that looks very similar between sentences on the one hand and noun phrases on the other. And finally, we can attach modifiers inside nominals in just the same way as we attach modifiers inside verb phrases. And as we would expect, they occur outside the arguments, that is, further away from the head. So in a sentence, we can get the Normans invaded England, and we can add the modifier in 1066 to give the Normans invaded England in 1066. And in a parallel way, in the nominalization, we can have the Normans' invasion of England, and we can add a modifier, which again will occur outside the complement, the Normans' invasion of England in 1066. Another adjunct might be something like if we have the company exploited the children to make more profit, and we have the nominalization, the company's exploitation of the children to make more profit. So again, a close parallel between the structure we see in the sentence and the structure that we see in the nominal. At the same time, there are some differences between the structure of sentences and the structure of nominals, and some of those we're going to be able to explain at this point, and other ones we may be able to explain only later. So a first obvious difference is in exactly how those two arguments that we've seen, so we've seen the subject argument, the specifier, and we've seen a complement, how these get realized in the case of the sentence as opposed to the nominal. So in a sentence like Mary collected the mushrooms, we have two noun phrases, Mary and the mushrooms. In the corresponding nominalization, we get Mary's collection of the mushrooms. So there's two differences there. One is that the subject argument in the case of the nominalization has this cliticized z attached to it, the possessive marker. So you get Mary's collection, not just Mary, as opposed to Mary collected. And the other difference is that the complement in the case of the verb phrase is another noun phrase. So we get Mary collected the mushrooms, where the mushrooms is a noun phrase. But in the case of the nominalization collection, that same theme, the thing that gets collected, gets expressed as a PP, as a prepositional phrase headed by of. So we get Mary's collection of the mushrooms. This is actually a completely general fact about nominals in English. So we've seen that verbs vary in what kind of complements they take. So some verbs just take noun phrase complements. So you get I love my mother. Some verbs select PP complements. So you get things like I rely on my mother. And other verbs select CP complements. So I think that my mother is trustworthy. In the case of the nominal, we find PP complements. So you can have my reliance on my mother. We can have CP complements, my belief that my mother is trustworthy. But we actually don't find NP complements. So you don't get my love, my mother. You get my love of my mother. So it seems that what corresponds to an NP complement in the case of a verb phrase is a PP complement headed by of inside a noun phrase. And we'll see that in all of the or in many of the examples that we're going to look at. The interpretation that we get for these nominals suggests that these nouns can assign thematic roles in just the way that verbs can. So in a sentence like Matilda hates cats, we know that the first noun phrase that we get, Matilda, is interpreted as the experiencer of the emotion of hatred, and the second noun phrase, the complement of the verb, the object, is interpreted as a thing that arouses that emotion. In exactly a similar way, in the nominalization, we would get Matilda's hatred of cats, and again, Matilda is obligatorily interpreted as the person experiencing the emotion, and the other noun phrase inside that of PP is interpreted as a thing arousing the emotion. So that looks very similar between what we're finding inside the verb phrase in the sentence and inside the noun phrase. One difference, however, is that we've seen that arguments of verbs are frequently, although not always, obligatory. So, for example, admire. You can say, we admired the city, but it's really odd, and I would say ungrammatical, just to say, we admired, or even just admired. But in the case of the nominal, in the case of the noun admiration, you can certainly express both of those arguments, and they will get the same thematic roles, and the same ones will be assigned to the right and to the left. So you'll get a noun phrase like, her admiration of him was surprising. At the same time, though, those two arguments don't have to be expressed for the nominal to be grammatical. So, for example, you can say, he wanted her admiration, where you just have the noun phrase, her admiration. Or even you can say, this sight commands admiration, where you just have admiration on its own. So this is a general property, it seems, between noun phrases and verb phrases or sentences. The arguments in verb phrases and in sentences are often obligatory, but in noun phrases they never seem to be obligatory. It also is a consequence of this that we don't find expletive subjects inside noun phrases. We've seen that in sentences there is a requirement, at least in English, that sentences have to have a noun phrase in the subject position, even if there's no other reason for anything to appear there. So this is what we've called the subject requirement. For example, you can say, 3 zebras suddenly appeared round the corner, or you can say, there suddenly appeared 3 zebras round the corner, but you can't say, appeared 3 zebras round the corner. On the other hand, in the nominal, that form with there is ungrammatical. So you can say, the appearance of 3 zebras round the corner surprised us. But you can't say, there's appearance of 3 zebras round the corner surprised us. And that is consistent with the idea that this subject requirement is a requirement in sentences, and it's the only reason why you have that there, where it appears here. It's filling this empty subject position, and the sentence requires that there should be something in that position. You find a similar case, for example, you can say, no proof of this conjecture exists, where no proof of this conjecture is in the subject position. Or you can get the sentence, there exists no proof of this conjecture, where the initial position, that subject position, is occupied by there. If you don't have the proof of the conjecture in the subject position, you have to have that there. It's ungrammatical to say, exists no proof of this conjecture. But in the noun phrase, it's different. So you can have instead, the existence of the proof is disputed, but not there's existence of the proof is disputed. So you don't find expletives in noun phrases because the subject requirement doesn't apply in noun phrases.
This production is brought to you by the University of Edinburgh.